to biology, the scientific study of life. How elevated CO2 affects forest ecology, the facts one experiment. To assess how increasing atmospheric concentration of CO2 might affect temperate forests, scientists at Duke University began the Forest Atmosphere Carbon Transfer and Storage Facts 1 experiment in 1995. The researchers are manipulating a single environmental factor, the concentration of CO2 to which tracts of forest are exposed. All other factors such as temperature, precipitation, and wind speed and direction vary normally for both experimental plots and adjacent control plots exposed to only atmospheric CO2. The Facts 1 experiment includes 6 plots in a 200 acre equal 18 hectare tract of loblol pine within Duke University's experimental forest, as shown in this figure. Each plot consists of a circular area approximately 30 meters in diameter, ringed by 16 towers. Within 3 of the plots, the experimental plots, the towers produce air containing about 1.5 times present-day CO2 concentrations. Instruments on a tall tower in the center of each experimental plot measure the direction and speed of the wind, adjusting and the distribution of CO2 to maintain a suitable CO2 concentration. The other 3 plots serve as controls. The Facts 1 study is testing how elevated CO2 influences tree growth, carbon concentration in soils, insect population, soil moisture, the growth of plants in the forest and destroy other factors over a 10-year period. Researchers expect that the study will provide a sound basis of predicting the response of whole forests to elevated future CO2 conditions. Some of the data recorded so far include higher wheat and lipid content of loblol pine seeds, higher soil respiration, higher rates of soil weathering, and higher rates of photosynthesis by sweet gum trees, liquidambar, strathiflo in experimental plots. As in the Hubbard Brook experimental forest, the responses of this forest ecosystem will take many years to unfold, and there are sure to be surprises along the way. The greenhouse effect and global warming. One factor that complicates prediction about the long-term effects of rising atmospheric CO2 concentration is its possible influence on Earth's heat budget. Much of the solar radiation that strikes the planet is reflected back into space. Although CO2 and water vapor in the atmosphere are transparent to visible light, they intercept and absorb much of the reflected infrared radiation, reflecting some of it back toward Earth. This process returns some of the solar heat. If it were not for this greenhouse effect, the average air temperature at Earth's surface would be 18 Celsius degree, equal minus 2.4 Fahrenheit. And most life as we know it could not exist. The marked increase in atmospheric CO2 concentrations over the last 150 years concerns many scientists because of its potential to increase global temperatures. Notice the figure showed that, or for circumstantial evidence of a link between increasing CO2 and global warming. To date, no models are sophisticated enough to include all the biotic and abiotic factors that can influence atmospheric gas concentrations and temperature. For example, cloud cover CO2 uptake by photosynthetic organisms and the effects of particles in the air. However, a number of studies predict that by the end of the 21st century, atmospheric CO2 concentration will double and average global temperature will increase by about 2 Celsius degrees. Supporting these models is a correlation between CO2 levels um, and temperatures in prehistoric times. Climatologists can actually measure CO2 levels in bubbles trapped in glacial ice at different times in Earth's history. Prehistoric temperatures are inferred by several methods, including analysis of past vegetation based on fossils. An increase of only 1.3 Celsius degree would make the world warmer than at any time in the past 100,000 years. A worst case scenario suggests that the warming would be greatest near the poles. The resultant melting of polar ice might raise sea level by an estimated 100 meter, gradually flooding areas 150 kilometer or more inland from the current coastline. New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and many other cities would then be underwater. Recent collapses in the Antarctic ice shelf, which in 2022 released an iceberg 4 times the area of Manhattan, may be an early sign of global warming. A warming trend would also alter the geographic distribution of precipitation, making major agricultural areas of the central United States much drier. For example, however, the various mathematical models disagree about the details of how climate in each region will be affected. By studying how past periods of global warming and cooling affected plant communities, ecologists are trying to predict the consequences of future temperature changes. Analysis of fossilized pollen provides evidence that plant communities change dramatically with changes in temperature. However, past climate changes occurred gradually, and plant and animal populations could migrate into areas where abiotic conditions allow them to survive. Many organisms, especially plants that cannot disperse rapidly over long distances, will probably not be able to survive the high rates of climate change projected to result from global warming. The global warming that apparently is now underway as a result of the addition of CO2 to the atmosphere is a problem of uncertain consequences and no simple solutions. Coal, natural gas, gasoline, wood, and other organic fuels that cannot be burned without releasing CO2 are central to our increasingly industrialized societies. Stabilizing CO2 emissions will require concerted international effort and the acceptance of dramatic changes in both personal lifestyles and industrial processes. Many ecologists think that this effort suffered a major setback in 21 when the United States pulled out of the Kyoto Protocol. 1997 pledged by industrialized nations to reduce their CO2 output by about 5% over a 10-year period. Depletion of atmospheric ozone. Life on Earth is protected from the damaging effects of ultraviolet UV radiation by a protective layer of ozone molecules O3 that is present in the lower stratosphere between 17 and 25 kilometers above Earth's surface. Ozone absorbs radiation, ultraviolet radiation preventing much of it from reaching organisms in the biosphere. Satellite studies of the atmosphere suggest that the ozone layer has been gradually thinning since 1975. The destruction of atmospheric ozone probably results mainly from the accumulation of chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, chemicals used for refrigeration as propellants in aerosol cans and in certain manufacturing processes. When the breakdown products from these chemicals rise to the stratosphere, the chlorine they contain reacts with ozone, reducing its molecules O2. Subsequent chemical reactions liberate um, um, the chlorine, allowing it to react with other ozone molecules in catalytic chain reaction. The effect is most apparent over Antarctica, where cold winter temperatures facilitate these atmospheric reactions. Scientists first described the ozone hole over Antarctica in 1985 and have since documented that is a seasonal phenomenon that grows and shrinks in an annual cycle. However, the magnitude of ozone depletion and the size of the ozone hole have generally increased in recent years, and the hole sometimes extends as far as the southernmost portions of Australia, New Zealand, and South America. At the more heavily populated middle latitudes, ozone levels have decreased 2 to 10% during the past 20 years. The consequences of ozone depletion for life on Earth may be quite severe. Some scientists expect increases in both lethal and non-lethal forms of skin cancer and cataracts among humans, as well as unpredictable effects on crops and natural communities, especially the phytoplankton that are responsible for a large proportion of Earth's primary production. The danger posed by ozone depletion is so great that 180 countries, including the United States, have signed the Montreal Protocol, which calls for the elimination of chemicals that deplete ozone. Many nations, again include the United States, have ended the production of chlorofluorocarbons. As a consequence of these actions, there are signs that the rate of ozone depletion is slowing. Unfortunately, even if all chlorofluorocarbon were globally banned today, chlorine molecules that are already in the atmosphere will continue to influence stratospheric ozone levels for at least a century. Destruction of Earth's ozone shields is one more example of how much humans have been able to disrupt the dynamics of ecosystems and the entire biosphere.